Kit Harington has always been attentive to detail. In recent months, he began to notice a curious pattern in the behavior of David, his private driver. Every night, before dropping him off at home, David would make a mysterious stop. At first, the actor thought it was just a coincidence, but the small clues began to accumulate. The interior of the car was always warmer than normal, the glances disguised by the rear-view mirror, and a heavy silence that filled the air. That night, curiosity got the better of him. Instead of going straight to his mansion, Harington asked the car to discreetly turn back. As they turned the corner, a strange anguish gripped his chest. What he was about to discover would bring tears to his eyes. Before continuing with this story, tell us where you are watching from. And if you enjoy stories full of mystery like this one, subscribe to the channel. There's another special waiting for you tomorrow. Rain poured down on Los Angeles like a continuous veil, turning the streets into mirrors that reflected the orange lights of the streetlights and car headlights. The drops ran down the glass like indecisive trails, disappearing into the darkness. The rhythmic sound of water hitting the roof of the vehicle was almost hypnotic, a whisper that invaded the heavy silence inside the car. Kit Harington was exhausted. Meetings, interviews, appointments. All he wanted was to get home and disconnect from the world. Sitting in the front seat, he stared at the drenched city, trying to clear his mind. But something in the car kept him awake. David gripped the steering wheel with clenched fingers. His posture was rigid, his shoulders tense, his breathing slightly rapid. He'd noticed all of this. He'd always been good at picking up on things that went unnoticed by others. That night, the driver seemed even quieter than usual. When he spoke, his words faltered, and his eyes. They constantly darted to the rear-view mirror as if he feared he was being watched. On the dashboard, Harington noticed traces of adhesive tape, subtle marks as if something had been stuck there for a while. A tablet holder, perhaps? Or a child's toy? When he tried to adjust his seat, his hand touched something strange. A small teddy bear, worn and dirty, lay forgotten beside him. Its little plastic eyes reflected the soft light from the dashboard. Harington picked it up, surprised. He had never noticed that toy before. He looked up at David, who kept his eyes fixed on the road, but wore a heavy expression on his face, more than mere fatigue. That's when Harington was sure his driver was hiding something, and it wasn't small. The rain had eased, but a cold mist still covered the city. The sound of tires sliding on wet asphalt filled the almost deserted street. The car took the same route as always, turning onto a quiet street near a 24-hour gas station. Kit had noticed this before. David always made that stop. Before, he thought it was just a habit. Now, he wasn't so sure. The driver turned off the car, but he didn't get out. He stayed there, motionless, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Kit then noticed another disturbing detail. The interior was still warm, too warm for a car that had just been parked. He glanced discreetly in the rear-view mirror. He tried to see something in the back seat, but everything was in shadow. Until he heard it, a faint sound, like the noise of a package being opened, slowly. His body tensed. It was as if someone was opening a snack. But who? "Are you coming down, Harington?" David asked, his voice firm but strained. Kit hesitated. Part of him wanted to stay, watch, find out what was behind it all. But deep down, he knew he still had no concrete reason to question David. Not yet. "Yes, thank you, David." He gathered his bag and got out of the car. The cold night wind hit him like a slap in the face. He took a few steps and stopped. He turned subtly and looked inside the car. David was still there, motionless, watching or waiting. He stood there for a few seconds, almost motionless. He fiddled with something on the dashboard and glanced quickly in the rearview mirror, as if to confirm that Harington had already walked away. But Harrington's instincts were screaming. Something was wrong. He wasn't sure what, but that uneasy feeling wouldn't leave him alone. He took a deep breath and headed home, but he was sure of one thing: this wasn't over yet. Even after hours, that uneasiness remained like a weight on his chest. Something told him he hadn't seen everything. Something was being hidden. In bed, he tossed and turned. Sleep slipped through his fingers like sand in an hourglass. The scene from the night before replayed in his mind. David stopping in the same place as always, hesitating before turning off the engine, the unusual heat inside the car, and the sound, that faint rustling of a package being opened in the back seat. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just fatigue. Maybe he was seeing connections where there were none. A simple habit? A coincidence? But Harington wasn't the kind of man to ignore his intuition. He knew when something was out of place. He glanced at the clock. It was past 2 in the morning. He let out a heavy sigh, sat down on the bed and ran his hand through his hair. There was only one way to dispel that uneasiness, find out the truth with his own eyes. He put on a jacket, grabbed his keys and left. The early morning air was even colder. The streets of Los Angeles were asleep. An occasional car passed in the distance, and the silence was broken only by occasional gusts of wind. Kit drove slowly, feeling his anxiety grow as he approached the street where the bus stop was located. He turned off his headlights before turning the corner. He slowed to a crawl, and there it was. David's car, parked in exactly the same spot. Harington stopped a few meters ahead. He remained hidden, watching. David was inside the vehicle. But he wasn't asleep. He was awake, staring into space, lost in thought. It didn't make sense. It was too late for a simple rest. If David had a home, he should already be there. Then something happened. A second car slowly approached and parked near the entrance of the small convenience store at the gas station. Kit leaned forward, alert. A woman got out of the vehicle. In her arms, she was carrying something or someone. David got out of the car and went to meet her. They exchanged a few quick words, and then came the moment that made Harington's heart stop for a second. David opened the back door of his car and carefully picked up a child in his arms, a boy asleep. Harington's eyes widened. David wrapped the little boy in a jacket, protecting him from the cold. It was an automatic gesture, affectionate, full of care. And in that moment, everything made sense. The excessive heat in the car, the recurring stops, the teddy bear left on the seat. David wasn't just there to rest, he was waiting for someone. Kit felt his chest tighten. There was something much bigger going on. David wasn't just a driver, he was hiding a story. And now Harington needed to find out what it was. He drove back home, but his mind remained elsewhere in the city. The image of the driver holding the child was like a photograph fixed behind his eyes. When he got to his apartment, he dropped his keys on the counter and threw himself on the couch, staring at the ceiling. He tried to convince himself that it wasn't his problem. David was just an employee. But he couldn't, because deep down, he knew what it was like to be in that situation. Before fame, success, premieres, and red carpets, Harington knew what it was like to be adrift. He remembered the freezing nights in Toronto, sleeping on borrowed couches, or sometimes in his own car. He remembered the fear of waking up the next day and finding that everything had gotten worse. And then a memory hit him, the face of a man, a stranger who changed his life with a simple gesture. Kit never knew his name. He was just an old man who had a modest workshop in the neighborhood. One day, seeing him lost, that man offered him a job, nothing permanent, just basic tasks like changing tires or cleaning tools. But it was enough for him to get back on his feet, save some money, take a step forward. And more importantly, it was there that he learned something he never forgot. The difference between giving alms and giving someone a real chance. Lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling, Harington finally understood why that scene had hit him so hard. Because he saw himself in that boy, in that situation, in that heavy silence. He let out a long sigh, covering his face with his hands. Ignoring what he saw meant allowing David and that child to continue living like this. But if he decided to act, what exactly could he do? Harington remained there for a long time, torn between acting or simply leaving everything as it was. But one thing weighed heavier than his doubts: the certainty that something had to change. The next morning he had made his decision. He would do whatever was necessary. No matter what David said, He would not allow this situation to continue. He watched from the apartment window as the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of gold and orange that bathed Los Angeles in a soft light. But his mind was far away. The image of David holding that child with the care of a father still hammered in his head. Harington picked up his cell phone and typed a message. "Pick me up at 7. I want to have dinner somewhere different tonight." As always, the reply came quickly. "Yes, Mr. Harington." He stared at the screen for a few seconds, thinking. He knew he couldn't broach the subject directly. He couldn't offer help openly. That could hurt David's pride. He needed to find a way to reach out, without making it seem like charity. And he already had a plan. At 7 o'clock sharp, David's black car pulled up in front of the building. Kit got in and greeted him with a slight smile. "Good evening, David." "Good evening, Mr. Harington. Where are we going?" "I'm in the mood for somewhere cozy tonight. A restaurant with good food, a family atmosphere, and no photographers at the door. Any suggestions?" David thought for a moment. "I know a little Italian place downtown. Nothing fancy, but very welcoming." "Perfect, let's go there." During the drive, Kit watched David closely. He looked exhausted. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. His eyes blinked more slowly, small signs of fatigue that didn't come only from his body. But it wasn't the time to ask, not yet. They arrived at the restaurant. It was simple but charming. Soft lighting, the aroma of fresh sauce in the air, worn wooden tables that seemed to carry decades of stories. They sat near the window. Kit, as always, kept his cap low, avoiding attention. David studied the menu with a care that caught his attention, as if each choice had to be measured with precision. Kit recognized that look. It was the same one he used to have back in the old days, when choosing something from the menu meant giving up something else. He ordered quickly, a plate of pasta and a glass of wine. Then he looked at David. "Order whatever you want," he said lightly. David hesitated, then chose something simple, pasta with a basic sauce and a glass of water. Silence reigned for a few moments, until Kit decided to break it. "How long have you been working for me, David?" "A little over 2 years, sir." "Call me Kit," he corrected with a restrained smile. David nodded but said nothing more. "Do you like the job?" David smiled slightly. "I do. You're a good boss." "Thank you, but I'm talking about the job itself." David was silent for a moment before replying. "It's honest work. It doesn't pay much, but it's decent." Kit absorbed his words. He knew there was more behind them, but David was clearly trying to keep things contained. "And outside of work, how's life?" David fiddled with his plate, avoiding eye contact. "Surviving." That word hung in the air. Harington understood that pressing now would be useless. He needed another approach. "You know, David," he began, looking out the window, "when I was younger, I went through some tough times." David looked up curious. "I've slept in cars. I've gone without knowing where my next meal was coming from." David was silent. "A lot of people think Hollywood is all red carpets and flashbulbs, but before all that, I just wanted to survive." David let out a deep sigh. He seemed to absorb every word. "Back then, a man came along. He didn't give me money. He gave me work. He gave me dignity." A heavy silence fell over the table. Kit now stared directly at David. "You don't have to tell me anything, but I know something's going on. I can see it." David lowered his head. "Kit," he hesitated. But Harington interrupted him gently. "Just answer me one thing. Do you have a place to sleep tonight?" David closed his eyes for a second before answering. "Yes." Harington noticed the hesitation. "In your car?" he asked bluntly. David swallowed hard. "Yes." Kit let out a long sigh. "And your daughter?" David's eyes widened, tense. How do you know that?" Harington rested his elbows on the table. "Because I watch. Because something didn't make sense. Because I've been there." David ran his hands over his face, visibly uncomfortable. "I didn't want you to know." "Why?" "Because I don't want your pity." Kit shook his head. "And who says what I'm offering is pity?" David looked at him, surprised. Harington took a deep breath. "I don't want to give you charity, David. I want to give you a chance." David was silent. "I have an empty apartment. It's not luxurious, but it's safe. I want you and your daughter to stay there until you get back on your feet." David began to shake his head. "I can't accept that." "Yes, you can, and you will," Kit replied firmly. David clenched his fists, fighting his pride. I don't want to be a burden." Kit smiled kindly. "Then don't be. Think of it as a new beginning." David stared at the keys in his hands. The cold metal against his skin felt almost unreal. Here was something that could change everything. Across the room, Kit Harington watched him with calm serenity. No judgment, no demands. Emily, David's daughter, stood next to her father, clutching her old teddy bear. Her curious eyes followed his every move. She didn't understand everything, but she could sense what was happening. "Are you sure?" David asked, his voice breaking. Kit placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "I've never been more sure in my life." David took a deep breath. Finally, he nodded. "Let's see the place." Harington led them to the building. It wasn't luxurious, but it was cozy, safe, a home. When David opened the door, he hesitated. He stood in the doorway for a few seconds. The air there seemed denser, as if it carried too much meaning. It was the first time in a long time that he wouldn't have to recline the car seat to sleep. That he wouldn't have to wake up scared of someone knocking on the window. Emily let go of her father's hand and ran down the hall. "It's huge!" she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. David watched his daughter explore the apartment, seeing the glow of happiness appear on her face. And he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Kit leaned against the wall, watching the scene with a satisfied smile. "It has everything you need. It's simple but cozy. While you get settled, you won't have to worry about rent or bills." David shook his head, still trying to process it all. "I don't know how to thank you for this." "Don't even try, just take it." David laughed nervously. "You won't take no for an answer, will you?" "No way." Emily appeared in the living room with something in her hands. "Do I have my own room?" Kit smiled. "Of course, and you can decorate it however you want." Her eyes lit up. "Daddy, can I put stars on the ceiling?" David bent down, held his daughter's hands, and felt his chest tighten. "Of course you can, sweetheart." She screamed with joy and ran off to explore her new room. David looked back at Kit, struggling with all the emotions that were overflowing. "I promise I'll pay you back for this." Kit smiled slyly. "You're already paying." "What do you mean?" Harington just pointed to Emily, now lying on the bedroom floor, trying to figure out how she was going to clean everything up. At that moment, David understood. The next morning, Kit took David to a special place. A small shed that smelled of oil and grease. An old friend of Harington's owned it. "You know how to fix cars, right?" David nodded. "I worked in a garage for years, before everything fell apart." "Great. I talked to the owner. He wants to give you a chance." David was speechless. He looked at Kit with surprise and gratitude in his eyes. "I don't even know what to say." "Then don't say anything. Just prove that you deserve this chance." The owner of the garage came out and held out his hand to David. "Harington told me about you. Let's see what you can do." David shook his hand firmly. "I won't let you down." Harington smiled. "I know you won't." That night, after his first day at work, David returned to the apartment and found Emily sleeping peacefully in bed. He approached her quietly and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "We did it, Princess," he whispered. She murmured something in her sleep and hugged her teddy bear tighter. David got up and went to the living room, where Harington was watching through the window. "Is she okay?" Harington asked. David nodded. "Better than ever." There was a long pause before David spoke again. "You changed our lives." Harington smiled softly. "No, you did that. I just gave you a little push." David took a deep breath, feeling the weight he had been carrying for so long begin to lift. "I'll never forget it, Harington." Harington patted him on the shoulder. "Just promise me one thing." "What?" Harington looked at him seriously. "When you're back on your feet, when you're stable, help someone else." David was silent for a moment, letting the words sink in. Then he smiled. "I promise." It had been a few weeks since David and Emily moved into their new home. Life was starting to settle down, something close to normal. David worked long hours at the repair shop, determined to prove his worth, while Emily started attending school, something she had never had the opportunity to do consistently. For the first time in a long time, David could breathe without the constant weight of uncertainty. Harington had stepped aside, giving them the space they needed. That was the inspiring journey of David and Emily, and the transformative impact that the kindness of the Harington kit had on their lives. But now I want to know, what did you think of this story? Do you believe that small acts can really change someone's destiny? Leave your opinion in the comments. Let's talk about it. And if this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone you think needs to hear this message of hope. And of course, subscribe to the channel to hear more stories that show the power of generosity and overcoming adversity. Want more inspiration? Then click on one of the videos appearing on the screen to continue watching other moving stories that will make you reflect. See you in the next video.